Welcome, everyone. Welcome to Holy Ourselves, a podcast about becoming more authentic in our faith, especially around our sexuality and gender. And we're back for another interview. I was thinking this was going to be a solo episode, but then when I started looking at the episodes, like, no, we need to just go ahead and have this conversation. I am joined by my wonderful friend, Timon. Hello, Timon.
Hi, Josh. Hi, everybody.
Ah, I am so glad. We were trying to get you onto Life on Side B, and it just like never happened.
I think we've been trying to get me on a podcast for like 3 years.
Yes,
At one point, I
yes.
went to a training with an organization I used to work for, and one of my old supervisors had listened to Life on Side B and was like, "Why haven't you been on that podcast yet?" And I was like, "Great question."
Ask Josh Proctor. It's his
Ask Josh
problem.
Proctor.
I know.
Yeah,
Did you listen to the finale of Life on Side B?
I still haven't. Don't kill me.
You get mentioned in it.
Oh,
Yeah, I know. We were talking about who would have been who I would have asked to be co-hosts if anyone had left. And
oh,
I made a reference that if Grant had left, that I was like you were on one of my list of people to ask.
well, that's
So
flattering.
who knows,
Yeah.
So yeah, you got to mention shout out final episode of the
Final
whole thing.
episode. Got my name up
Um
there.
so yeah, got it on. We made sure it was tagged on. Well, here we're going to talk about some really great stuff. We're going to talk about minority stress, and I'm really excited to talk about this. Before we get into that, can you just share a little bit about yourself, personally, professionally? Why are you here talking about this?
Yeah, that's such a good question because there's a lot of people with a lot of opinions. Um, so let's see. Personally, the big things to know about me. I am one of 8 kids in a evangelical homeschooling Christian military family. Um, Multiracial, multi-ethnic, like lots of moving pieces in my family. Um, Grew up in the church my whole life. So, I like said the sinner's prayer during a reading lesson and have never really looked back. Um, which is all just kind of context for my life. Still very close with my family. Like I'm on speaking terms with all 7 siblings and both parents, which is a little bit of a
Wow.
claim to fame because that's really difficult. Um, and yeah, so that's like a little of like who I am
Yes.
personally. I identify as, well, or I'll describe my sexuality as gay, queer, asexual. Um, I'm pretty comfortable with words and labels. And I think they're tools that we use to make sense of the world and connect with other people. Um, let's see, professionally, I'm a licensed marriage and family therapy associate. So I just finished a master's degree. I work right now under someone else's license and supervision, but I work with individuals,
Mm,
couples, and families. My degree had a concentration in queer and trans mental health, so I learned a lot of the specifics about sexual and gender minorities and their experiences and providing care to them. Um, but I also kind of love doing just like general family and couple therapy. I really love the ways that
mm,
God made us to exist in community and to connect with other people. Um, and so it feels to me like very holy work to help people who are stuck in how they connect with the people who are most important to them to get unstuck.
yeah.
Um,
Oh my gosh.
yeah. Josh, did
Yes.
I miss anything?
No, I think that's great. Sometime I think we also need to talk about couples therapy. First of all, have you watched all the show Couples Therapy on Paramount Plus?
I've watched pieces of it. We watched it in class
Okay.
sometimes.
That makes sense in classes, but
Uh-huh.
I've been processing more about like the reality of doing therapy and healing in communal situations opposed to like
Mm,
one-on-one. And I
yeah.
think there's a place for both, but we're not going to take time up for right now on that, but we're going to put a
Yeah.
pin there. And at
You'll
some
have me
point we
on
need to have
later.
that conversation. We
Hmm.
will 100%. But we're here to talk
Hmm.
about minority stress. I think you hit so many great points, and just congratulations, first of all, on finishing your
Thank you.
master's and everything. That's not a small task, like
It was
at all.
not.
I'm, gosh, yeah. But so with with minority stress, for those unfamiliar with
Hmm.
the term, how would you define it?
Yeah. It can be kind of an intimidating term, and I love breaking it down for people because it's
Please.
super useful. I think once you know it, you're like, oh, that's why,
Mm.
that's how it
Hmm.
works. So minority stress, I'm going to start with the origins because I think that's helpful. It came from stress research that was showing that sexual minorities, particularly like LGBTQ people, but sexual and gender minorities, have worse mental and physical health outcomes compared to the rest of the
Mm.
population. And so they were really trying to figure out, okay, what is going on? And they kind of honed in on there's something about how they experience stress. Um,
Mm.
and so the minority stress model developed from a researcher named Ilan Meyer over the past 30 years. I think he's still publishing. Um,
Wow.
but yeah, but the article I cited in my master's thesis was from 2003, so it's pretty well established at this point. And what it looked at was, okay, so there are these sexual and gender minorities who are just born into a space where they're not like the people around them. Something
Yeah.
that's really different for many, if not all, sexual and gender minorities is that we're not born into families where people are like us. And for many other categories of marginalization, um, you have people who are
Hmm.
marginalized in the same way that you are around you to look to say, how do I cope with this? How do I understand this? Um, and for LGBTQ people, that's just often not true, at least like when we're kids, when we're born. And so minority stress talks about two types of stress. It talks about distal stressors, and those are stressors that happen outside of you. That's the way to remember it. If it's inside you, it's a
Okay.
proximal stressor. If it's outside you, it's a distal stressor. And
Okay.
so distal stressors, we just tend to talk about as like a bias incident. That's homophobic legislation. That's getting bullied. That's seeing someone else get bullied.
Mm.
Um, that's learning about Matthew Shepard in history class.
Yes.
Just any of these ways that we know, okay, there's real bigotry and bias against people like me. That's the distal stress. Because it doesn't come from us. We're not the source of the bias, but the bias is out in the
Hmm.
world and we're exposed to it.
Yeah.
And then that gets processed and stored internally in
Mm.
the classic model talks about three types, and I have um, like a head canon. I have like a little one that I'll talk about that I think shows up really for those of us in the church. But it's not part of the
Mm.
research. It's just a little add-on that I think is relevant. Um, so the three classics are the first is internalized homophobia. So that's an internal belief that there's something wrong with you, there's something worse about you because of,
Hmm.
we might also say internalized queer phobia, just like
Hmm.
your sexual or gender identity experience. Um, like, I'm doing it wrong, I'm not
Yeah.
attracted the way other people are attracted, and that means I'm bad.
Yeah.
Um, that
I've talked about that like being like when messages of difference get
Mhm.
communicated as like less than kind of aspect. Like
Yeah,
you understand it as this. Continue.
yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Recognizing like I'm different in this realm, and that means that I'm less than. That's a
Yeah.
great way to say it. Um, that moves to what we call expectations of rejection. And so
Mm.
that's where we start to look at other people and say, okay, I'm less than them, but they don't know that yet. And so
Yeah.
if I can hide that, well, that actually moves us to the third, which is identity concealment. But we look at them and we say, if they
Mm.
found out, they might not want to be my friend. They might
Mm.
not be proud to have me as their son. They might
Hmm.
be think that I'm not able to be a small group leader, or that I shouldn't work with kids, or that I am a sinner and so I shouldn't be in this church. Like whatever it is, we start to look at other people and rightly or wrongly think if they knew this about me, it would be a real problem. And
Yeah.
that leads to the third minority stressor, the third proximal stressor, which is identity concealment. We start to do things to keep other people from finding out so that because if they don't know that we're less than them, they'll treat us like we're their equal. If they don't know that
Mm.
we should be kicked out, by should be, I mean that's that internal belief of if gay people should be kicked out so they can't know that I'm gay, so I don't have to be kicked out. And that takes a lot of work. Like there's mental
Yes.
and physical energy that just goes to trying to make sure nobody knows. Um,
Whew.
yeah. So that's kind of the
Oh my
big
gosh.
overview. What is minority stress theory?
Wow. Okay. There's so much to talk about here. First of all, I love that you talked about the nuance of growing up in a house where no one is like you. Like,
Mm-hmm.
because that's been something that has really been on my mind when I did my Doctor of Ministry
Mm-hmm.
project on spiritual formation, was this kind of nuance experience. I feel like, correct me if you think
Mm-hmm.
I'm wrong on this, but I feel like the closest experience, I mean, you might, hey, actually, you would have experience with this with your family situation. I feel like the closest experience we have is children being adopted
Mm-hmm.
into families of other,
Mm-hmm.
ethnicities or races. It's like
Mm-hmm.
the closest kind of experience. But then
Mm-hmm.
there's a little bit more overt difference that then has to be addressed sometimes, maybe.
Right.
That it's not, because kind of like what you were saying there, or like the whole thing of like messages of differences getting communicated into messages of less than, and like the ability to see people around you. I think
Mm-hmm.
what makes it hard is the inability to process it. Like,
Yeah.
you know, it's
Yeah.
okay to be different, but when you can't process it, when you can't talk about it,
Mm-hmm.
we we don't metabolize it well. We don't
Mm-hmm.
heal from it well.
Yeah. I think that's spot on. And I think if we look at kind of the history of
Mm.
some of the things that we've tried as we've done adoptions in the US, and so I'm not an expert in this, and there's a lot of people who are an expert in adoption and adoption trauma, but I know that some of what we used to do is we used to try to pretend that the adoption hadn't happened. And that was like the
Yes.
advice to parents was like, adopt a kid who is
Mhm.
likely to genetically look like you, and then don't ever tell them that they were adopted. And that's what will be really good for them. And what we found is like that's not good for them. And so
Yeah.
my family, I mean, some of my siblings are black, so we never had the option of pretending, but we also never did. We talked really openly about the different people, like how did we join the family? And for some of us, it was
Amazing.
adopted as a baby, and some of us, it was adopted
Yeah.
older, and some of us, like my mom gave birth to, and like those pregnancies were different. And so it all became this like everybody has a story, and everybody's story is different, and there's some categories, but even those
Mhm.
categories have nuance. And so there wasn't shame about it. There was
Yeah.
conversation. And I
Hmm.
think I think for LGBTQ people in this metaphor, we're still in that place of, well, pretend they're not adopted. Pretend that they came into the family the normal way. Pretend that they're just like the rest of us. And so it's not the experience of sexuality or gender that's problematic,
Yeah.
in my view, but it's that experience of isolation and that
Yeah.
experience of fear.
100%. And I had never thought about it till you said it about internalized homophobia being a minority stress.
Mm-hmm.
Like, it is this kind of stressor
Mm-hmm.
of having to figure out how to process this difference that
Mm-hmm.
can't be metabolized,
Mm-hmm.
can't be processed. And so then it kind of gets directed inward
Totally.
in the way. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, because it's something you have to think about all the time. All the time you have to
Yeah.
be saying, I'm different in this way and that's bad and I have to compensate for it.
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
like then you're in the grocery store thinking about your grocery list and also how it's bad that you have your sexuality.
Oh my God.
One of the
Yep.
things, I grew up in churches that were really worried about LGBTQ people making like their whole identity being their sexual or gender experience. Um,
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that then really surprised me when I started coming out was I was like, I think about it so much less. I talk about it
Right?
more. Um,
Yeah.
I like read more books about it. Like, and at this point I got a master's degree concentration in queer and trans mental health. So like I think about sexuality and gender a lot and I
Yeah.
won't pretend that I don't. But in terms of like daily, the amount that I'm like, oh, I'm gay and that means something. Oh, I'm gay and that
Mm-hmm.
means something. It actually went way down when I came out. Um, and
Yeah.
And I think that just speaks to like the mental load of internalized homophobia. As I was able to tell people I'm gay and probably you hate me now, and they went, "No, we don't. We love you.
Yeah.
Are
Yeah.
you good, dude? You seem really stressed out." The more that happened, the more I didn't have to spend all my time and energy obsessing about my sexuality and obsessing about
Hmm.
obscuring it. So then I
Yeah.
got to do way more interesting things with my time.
Hmm. So you talked about the community that you grew up in kind of
Hmm.
being this thing of this fear of you're going to make this your whole identity. Are there
Hmm.
other ways that you've seen religious contexts or like theological stuff? You kind of mentioned earlier about
Hmm.
religious stuff. How does that amplify? How does that alleviate
Hmm.
minority stress for LGBT people?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways. One is that especially those of us in communities that hold to like the historic sexual ethic or like a non-affirming position, I feel like
Hmm.
how we describe that position is a moving target. But
Yeah.
if you know, you know, those of us in those communities have almost never seen people like us held up as spiritually mature. And
Yes.
so I can remember the first time I was in a space where another gay man prayed, and I thought about it for like every day for like 3 weeks. And I
Oh
was
my
like,
gosh.
holy cow, like, and I don't remember at this point what his prayer was. Like, it wasn't like
Hmm.
it was like, dear God, thank you for this food. Thanks for the people here at this ministry event. Amen, let's eat. And I had never
Yeah.
heard someone who was like me talk to God like God cared about them.
Mm.
And that, like, that's stress because that
Yeah.
means everything that I did in my relationship with God was charting new territory. And I didn't
Yeah.
need to be. And, again, this is a place where I think, like, many racial minorities can say, like, okay, like, yeah, it's rough that Christianity in the US can be so dominated by white men. But, like, yeah, there
Hmm.
were other Black Christians. There were
Yeah.
other women who I knew followed God.
Hmm.
But I
Yeah.
think that pervasive
Traditions that
sense.
did this for long
Hmm.
periods of time, that kind of thing.
Hmm. Yeah, I think that pervasive sense of like people like me don't know God is really painful and really difficult. Um, I also think
Totally.
some of like when we talk about identity concealment and expectations of rejection, um, in some religious communities, these things are literally like policy. If
Oh my
anyone knows you're
gosh.
gay, you're fired.
Yeah.
If anyone
Yeah.
knows you're gay, you can't work in children's ministry. Sometimes
Like
it's not written down, but you know. Sorry.
yeah, no, sorry, I'm trying not to cut
Hmm.
you off, but like you're saying something, I'm like, oh my gosh. Yes, it's true. Cause I mean, there's even these denominations where they would say, like, if you say you're same sex attracted, you shouldn't be a pastor.
Hmm.
And it's like, what are you saying to people in your
Hmm.
congregation? I so resonated with what you were saying about seeing a gay person pray.
Hmm.
Um, in my church, we had this one Sunday where we were not talking about LGBT topics. No one went on stage and said, I
Hmm.
am gay, I am queer. But it just suddenly realized I was preaching, both in the worship team, everything else. Everyone who was on stage happened to be queer.
Whoa.
You know who noticed it? The queer people in the room.
Hmm.
They knew. They could
Hmm.
tell, they saw it. It went way over the heads of anyone else.
Hmm.
And again, because we weren't there saying, "Hi, I'm
Hmm.
reading as a gay person."
Yeah.
But it's funny how you're saying like the stress that you experience, you actually experience the relief just as high when you
Yes.
notice it.
Absolutely. I
Hmm.
love that story, and just I'm gonna like theologically detour because I can't help myself.
Go
But
ahead. Go
so like
ahead.
I'm named for oh, I should really know which chapter. It's either Acts chapter 6 or Acts chapter 7. So it's
Okay.
where the Hellenistic widows are like not being given food, and
Yeah.
there's this like whole uproar, and
Hmm.
the Greek Christians at that point are like, hey, like you gotta the feed our widows, and I believe the text is Hebraic, but like the Jewish Christians, you know more about this than I
Hmm.
do, are like, okay, our bad. They all come together as a group. They say, who are we going to give kind of the authority and the responsibility of caring for these people?
Yeah.
And then all the
Hmm.
names are from the community that was being discriminated against. So as a
Hmm.
whole community, they give all the authority and responsibility to the people, to the community being hurt to say,
Yeah.
why don't you take care of everyone? And what I love in your
Hmm.
story when you're like, yeah, like the cisgender heterosexual people in the room had no idea this was happening. I'm
Yeah.
like, yeah, because as we gave authority and responsibility to the community that was historically excluded and hurt, they then took care of everybody. And I
Yeah.
think like to me, I'm like, that's what the people of God should do every time. And that's the
Oh my
path.
gosh.
That's one of the key paths out of minority stress.
Yes. There's like a billion, not a billion, but a lot of queer people that I just kind of wish could have been in that room because it
Mm-hmm.
was a very healing moment for me, even
Mm-hmm.
being, I didn't even realize it till afterwards. It was like someone
Mm-hmm.
pointed, like, I was like, oh my God,
Mm-hmm.
that happened. And
Mm-hmm.
it does. It's like for the long stress that you experience, the like wave of relief
Mm-hmm.
that comes is even just as big.
Mm-hmm.
Um, Talking in this way of it, did you ever read that Huffington Post article, like the epidemic of gay loneliness? I think it was like Michael Hobbs or something.
I
Um,
think I did, but it was a while
okay,
ago.
I'll put it in the show notes for anyone interested because it talks. That was where I first learned about minority stress.
Hmm.
I had never
Mm-hmm.
like really been exposed to it. It was like 2017 or something, but it was coming up because I know that talks about long term effects. But for
Mm-hmm.
you, what are some of the kind of long term effects of chronic minority stress on mental health, like especially for
Yeah.
LGBT people?
Yeah. I mean, it's hard to overstate. Of course, like the literature started by looking at like population level, like people are literally dying
Mm,
earlier.
yeah.
And some of that is like lack of access to healthcare or just not seeking it. Um,
Hmm.
if you have a pervasive feeling that your life matters less than other people,
Yeah.
then you're like not going to seek healthcare when you're in pain. You're not going to think that it can ever get better. Um,
Mm,
in my work with LGBT clients, I see a lot of like often there's a lot of shame, and that leads to like not asking for help, not connecting with people. Um, I'll also
mm,
say like not offering help.
yeah.
Because I think it's important not to miss like it's not just that we should get support from other people, we're also resources.
Yeah.
And I think there's a lack of there's a barrier to showing up as a resource for other people when we're stuck
Hmm.
in this belief that we're not really good, or if they
Mm,
really knew us, they would reject us.
yeah.
Um, I think, of course, there are like disproportionate rates of suicidality, disproportionate rates of death by suicide, of self-harm, self-injury. Um, I think like so many healthy coping skills require at least one other person or require other people
Mm,
to know for it to be okay that other people know.
yeah.
Um, and so one of, I think, the real dangers of minority stress is that there's so much secrecy and there's so much hiding. Um, and like unhealthy coping skills tend to be the ones that we can do in secret alone.
Yeah.
Um, yeah.
That makes sense. Yeah. I feel like what impacted me when I first heard about the term minority
Mm-hmm.
stress, like going back to that article,
Mm-hmm.
some of the examples that it gave were like that I'm remembering is like, so if you have a woman who's an executive at a business and she speaks out and like she has to navigate this weird tension of in her brain of, oh, I'm if I speak out too hard, I'm going to be the really loud woman, but if I don't speak up, am I like even speaking up for myself? And there's this like stress that just comes on her from the stereotypes, from the things that she's carrying, from all of this stuff. I think even in my own story, it was like even as an out person, I did CrossFit for a while,
Mm-hmm.
and then I would sometimes be in the same group as some of these like college guys, these very straight college guys, and there would be this thing of like I need to keep up and actually beat
Mm-hmm.
these guys because it's like, and I wasn't conscious in my brain, but it's this general idea as I looked back at it going, oh yeah, I felt like, I have to prove I'm not the sissy, the weak gay kid
Mm-hmm.
in it. And then I push myself beyond the limit of what I should, and then I end up injuring myself. So like there's
Mm-hmm.
like competitive aspects to it, but
Totally.
there's also all of these ways that then even when you come out, you are navigating these like ideas that people have or what you expect people to have or
Mm-hmm.
how the things impact that it just takes a toll,
Mm-hmm.
you know, in how you operate.
Yeah. Yeah, I love like that example. I mean, I don't love, I'm sorry you had an injury,
No,
but
no, no. Yeah, yeah.
it's such a
Hmm.
good example of how like coming out does not solve all your problems.
Yep.
Um, and I think what you reminded me of is something in my life right now as I moved recently. Um, and so my roommate and I, and he's straight, but we're visiting churches in the area. Um,
Mm.
and because I present like I do, and he doesn't act like he's repulsed by me, we walk into these churches and we get a lot of, and how do you know each other? And we pause, and then he goes, well, we're roommates. And they go, roommates, we really welcome you. And it's like funny, and like mostly we laugh about it, but I had to
Mm.
reflect this week because he's a champ, like he does not care. He
Yeah.
doesn't care at all. And at one point I was like, does it like do you know that they all think that we're dating? And he was like, yeah, but what am I gonna do? Be like, hi, nice to meet you. I'm not having sex with him? Like, that's weird. And I'm like, okay, great. But then I
Yeah.
realized I was like, oh, I feel really weird about this because it's pushing on all of those buttons that there's something bad and infectious in me that I'm supposed to contain, right? And now, when a
Mhm.
gay man says that he's internalized the idea that he feels infectious, we can pretty neatly track that back to how we've talked about HIV, how we've talked about AIDS, and both historically and in the present. Um, and we can also track it back to like that's internalized homophobia, which then leads to an expectation of rejection, which then leads to me being like, how do we signal to all these people in these churches that we're not dating when actually that's a waste of time? If they ask us any follow-up questions, like I'm very open about my celibacy and he's straight. So, but again, it's like, oh, now it becomes this barrier to working out, to finding a church, and like I've been out for 9 years. And so it's so much better than it was. Like to anyone who's like newly coming out or thinking about coming out, like it is so much better than it was. And it's also like it's something you have to keep watching and keep dealing with.
Yeah. I it's so fascinating how these things show up, and I think um I could give a billion different like examples
Hmm.
of how it just, these little things. And so I guess where I would love us to go to is, so as we start noticing these things,
Hmm.
um, I was literally just talking to my pastor about this in some ways of like we wish we could live in a world without stress. It's actually
Hmm.
probably like not healthy if we didn't have stress, but we shouldn't live with chronic stress.
Hmm.
So there's some of these things that it's like I really hate that that happens to you guys when you go to the church, and like me, like the work, all these things, and sometimes it's not even anyone doing anything wrong. It's like the culture, it's the things we're carrying in. What do you think it looks like for LGBT Christians people to navigate this with resilience? In all of it.
Yeah. Yeah, I really resonate with the idea that resilience is something that happens in relationship and in community.
Hmm.
Um, which I'm like hesitant saying that because for people who don't feel like they have safe communities, I don't want the
Yeah.
message to be like, so you're gonna suffer forever. But I
Yeah.
do want the message to be like, we really need other people. And so I think that both the way out of minority stress and its most devastating effects are the ways it cuts us off from relationship. Um, right. And in both of our examples, right, your example was relational. The tension that you felt in comparison to these straight college guys led you to hurt yourself.
Hmm.
And for me, there's like the relational element between me and the people at church, but there was also the need for me to trust my roommate and say, hey, like I'm feeling weird that everyone thinks you're my boyfriend. That makes me feel like I need to do something
Hmm.
different. And it makes me feel like I'm like hurting you by visiting a church with you.
Yeah.
And then I needed him to say what he said, which is like, that's crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Like their
Yeah.
assumptions are on them. Um,
Hmm.
so I think. to make that a little more actionable for people, step one is often notice it. If we notice it,
Yeah.
we can then start to be thoughtful about how we respond. And so get curious and just start labeling it. Like when the internalized homophobia comes up, like when you catch yourself hiding something or feeling pulling back in a relationship or shifting, that might be what you need to do in that moment. And it might be what you need to do more regularly. I don't know your context, but you can start to label it like this isn't a truth about me. This is an experience of minority stress. This is internalized homophobia. This is an
Yeah.
expectation of rejection. This is identity concealment. And that can be
Hmm.
really helpful to move it from being something that's true about you to just something that's in your context, something that you're experiencing.
Yeah.
The other thing is find the people and the spaces and as Christians, like the spiritual practices that remind us that these things aren't true, right? And
Hmm.
so I mean, one, like God is the ultimate trustworthy person to work through these things with. God does not think that
Hmm.
you're worse for your sexuality or gender. And so, what are the things that remind you how God does see you? God is not going to reject you like for anything, but certainly for your experience of sexuality or gender. What are
Yeah.
the Bible verses, songs, practices that take you to that, like that bring you to remember that? Um, God already knows everything about you. And so when we're like hiding things about ourselves from God, that's really silly. And moving outward from our personal spiritual relationship with God, where are the people that you can start practicing this with? You can start naming, like, this is where I'm feeling stuck. This is what I need. Um, and sometimes it's not total, like, I think a major area of resilience is sometimes we need to clock out from doing the sexuality and gender stuff and find the ways to engage in community that are tangential but not about it. You know, I was knitting the other day in a communal space, and a woman came up to me and was like, "Could you teach me how to patch this rip in my baby's onesie?" And I was like, "Oh my gosh, I would love nothing more." And that for me was a very welcoming experience.
Yeah.
And it's not that she wasn't like, "You're gay, and that means that you can fix a baby onesie." But I was doing something that I never would have done when I was trying to seem straight because boys aren't allowed to create, I think is the
Yeah.
internalized rule there. And so I was knitting
Hmm.
in public and I was like, uh-oh, they might. I wasn't. But, you know, I'd had to work through like, I'm going to do this thing in public that boys won't
Yeah.
do. Um, and then that created a moment where I got to be helpful to her and I
Yeah.
felt really welcomed by her. So to
Yeah.
me, like that's the path to resilience is label it and then start to practice living differently with other people, with God, like in our relationships.
Yeah. Absolutely. I totally hear you in the whole thing of like, this happens in community. And that's really hard when, in spiritual direction, I always navigate this with people who are just like not in community. They just don't have it around them. And I I think it's often the really challenging thing of maybe that community starts with a therapist, maybe it starts with a
Mm-hmm.
spiritual director that
Mm-hmm.
you can trust, maybe if they're not even local, but just someone that you can process it with, hear your story, note like you're saying, notice it. And then with either looking at the community around you and maybe they don't completely know how to engage it, but maybe there's growth, maybe there's a desire to learn, or the willingness to go out and find the community that's going to be, around. I don't know if you I, I feel like for me one of the things that I was I was just telling this to someone. Um I went I went to a I was actually I just recorded an episode for Life on Side B, like a post season discussion, and I was mentioning it over there. But I went to like a gathering of LGBT Christians, um, you know, side B Christians, and it was interesting because normally I would say, like for most of us, being in those kind of spaces, uh, you feel more at home. You're with people that are like you, and I think that's healing, and I think that's beautiful, and I think it's a step of what we need, and I don't think it's bad. But I was surprised that when I went into this space, it was the first time in my life that I felt more known and seen in my local community than I did there.
Wow.
And I don't think it was because people in the gathering knew me less. They're people I love, they're people I adore, they're people that are like some of the closest people I know. But it's the reality that, as you were saying before, like for all the fears of us like putting all of our identity in our sexuality, the more I have been open and honest with a community that knows me fully, the more I have been able to live out as a holistic person, that
Hmm.
then there's realities of my life that are connected to being gay and being queer, but at the same time, that I don't get to show my LGBTQ Christian family from across that don't live around me because they're not seeing it. They're not seeing me as a pastor. They're not seeing me in these kind of realms. But I think that's actually where it's beautiful when you can have this community of people that are different than you and still find that acceptance and still find that like goodness. That the first step sometimes is finding it with people that are like you that find that. We find it in the LGBTQ community, maybe the queer Christian community, the side B community, wherever that is. And, but then when we can find it with people in our community that are different than us, and like you said with your roommate who's like going, trust me, like trust your roommate that you don't have to protect him. Because we've been
Hmm.
taught that we're the problem. We need to make sure our lives don't interfere or make
Hmm.
problems for others. But for your roommate to go, no, I've got this. Like, we're good. For
Yeah.
you to then like allow that stress
Yeah.
to leave.
This sparked for me that I'd said that I have like a favorite fourth proximal stressor that's not in the
Yes.
literature. Um,
Mm-hmm.
and Josh, you may have heard me talk about this before, but
Maybe.
it's a concept called translation exhaustion. And
Oh.
so it comes from an indigenous feminist scholar, Dr. Twyla Baker,
Mm.
who was at a conference, was talking with other indigenous women academics. Um, and what they kind of honed in on was this experience of, for them as indigenous people, to talk about their experience, like their day-to-day experience. Like, how is this conference going for you? They had to like zoom out and be like, well, let me tell you about the treaties that the US government broke with my community in the
Yes.
1800s. And let me give
Mm-hmm.
you a whole history lesson. And now that you've had that history lesson, I can tell you that I had a hard day yesterday. And like they couldn't get to I had a hard day yesterday because people needed all of this background. And they
Mm.
explicitly, in defining this, say like this applies to other marginalized communities. Like they kind of gave permission, gave a blessing to use it and contextualize it to your own experience. And I think that element of translation exhaustion is so often what I see come up for sexual minorities, gender minorities trying to connect with people different than them is,
Mm.
I want to be able to just like go be a pastor, but I'm going to be a pastor in a way that reflects my sexuality. And then if that happens, do I have to give a history lesson? Like, do I need to go back to Adam and Eve? Do I need to
Mm-hmm.
go back to the sexual revolution? Do I need to go back to the AIDS crisis um, before I can just talk about, hey, I had this like weird interaction? Um,
Yes.
And so I like to talk about it, one, because so often when I talk about this with queer people in the church, I say this term and they go, oh. And
Like
then
they
I
know it.
define
They
the
got
term
it.
and they're like,
Mm-hmm.
oh, there's
Mm-hmm.
language for this. But
Mm-hmm.
also because I think it's one of the ways that if you're listening to this as a cisgender heterosexual person, it's super actionable
Yeah.
because you can just not make us translate and you can just say, I might not understand all of it the first time, and that doesn't mean you have to pause and give me a history lesson. And I think
Yeah.
that's so powerful for people. Um,
Oh my gosh. Yeah. Two things that are coming up in my brain when you're explaining this is I think the first time I ever experienced something like that was actually not even well, I guess probably I had earlier experiences of LGBT related stuff, but when I moved to Colombia and I lived down there for years and I first didn't know Spanish, but then as I learned Spanish, I would live every day and I would go home with a migraine and I would be just so exhausted I could not operate. And I had a lot of people around me that'd be like, "Oh, Josh just doesn't understand the language." And I got to a point where I was like, "No, I understand every word you're saying." but there is culture in this that I'm having to explain. And then when I'm operating with you guys, there's just these really small nuances that if I don't explain, like if we don't explain between them, it becomes really hard to explain, and it like physically exhausted me every day. To the point that my whole thing would be like, I'm not going outside for today because I just can't deal with it. Um, but another one that I was thinking about was an experience I had when I started going to my church. And I didn't know this till later on, but like going in, you go into a church and you're like, what do I have to explain to people? How do I go about this? And that thing. I didn't realize that there were multiple people that had heard my interviews. Like when I started going to the church, I don't know where they found it, but after we started coming to the church, they found interviews of mine where I shared about me and my story. And so actually, as I started sharing about myself, they actually kind of already knew some because they had heard it. And as I began to realize, oh, people are actually have already been listening, I actually had to tell some people going, it's actually helpful to me if you already know this, because then I don't have to put the effort of explaining it to you, which is actually really helpful because we naturally go in and then it's like exhausting. And there's obviously a beauty. I think people wanted to allow me to share myself, as I desired, which is gorgeous. But I think that's, um, I love that for stressor. I don't love it, but I love that you've been able to acknowledge it because that's real.
Yeah.
That's like
Well,
huge.
like I found a screenshot of it on Twitter one day and I was like, my life just changed. Um,
Okay. Wow. Wow.
yeah.
Amazing. So then I guess in this, um, are there two questions? Two questions. I'm going to merge these together. If you have someone who's listening who's like, wow, like this is revolutionary for me, like I'm just seeing this, what is there anything you would say, maybe where they start? And then also with that, are there resources, maybe things that you would recommend for people to learn more, whether resources or places people can begin?
Yeah. Thinking through. So I think to someone who like this is like all new content and they're like, whoa, this is explaining everything. Um, I mean, I think step one is like go easy on yourself. Um, move a little slower than you feel like you want to.
Mm-hmm.
So often I see people, especially around coming out, but also like just topics in this area, we start to get a feeling we've been stuck for so long, and we get a feeling that there might be movement and we sprint. And so I would say, like, give this some time to sink in. Like I was saying earlier, like do some noticing, but be thoughtful, be prayerful, be planful about how you want to start to move differently.
Mm,
What are the experiments you want to do? Um,
yeah,
because I mean, we've talked about this at a pretty general level. And so
totally.
it's going to need some contextualizing. The
Mm-hmm.
other, I mean, in terms of resources, I think um, I don't have great like minority stress for people who didn't get a master's degree in uh, counseling. I really
Counseling,
wish
yeah.
I did. That's like on my list to find and develop. But right now, like most of my learning has been scholarly articles. Though
Yeah.
actually, the
Sounds like you
Wikipedia
need to
page
write
isn't
it.
bad.
Yeah.
The Wikipedia page is pretty good. And so if you want to learn more about minority stress,
Okay.
I've scanned it. It works.
Come through Wikipedia.
Come through Wikipedia. But then I would also really say actually stories and fiction about LGBTQ people
Mm,
is such a good resource
yeah.
because like wherever we are kind of in our process of understanding gender, sexuality, faith, I think just seeing stories of people figuring out life, figure out how to love other people and be loved by other people, I think it just gives us examples. Um,
Awesome.
and so, it's like go read the Heartstopper graphic novels, go watch movies and TV shows that have gay characters in them. I really like Pose. I think that's been recommended
Yes.
before. Um, yeah, I'm like hesitating because I think of some, and then I'm like, well, there is some like explicit sexual content. So,
Yeah.
you know,
Use discretion.
use discretion as it's appropriate for you. Um, but I think sometimes the idea of like how do we educate ourselves gets so
Mm,
heavy, and I think like also to someone newly thinking about this, experiencing this, like go have fun, go play, go like that's why I'm like go read like a young adult graphic novel. Um
yeah.
and just do something easy. Um
Hmm. Yeah.
I also think children's fiction actually. I mean, you can tell I used to work as a children's librarian, but I think grown-ups should read more children's fiction
Amen.
because especially if you're working on self-acceptance and internalized homophobia is like I hate myself because fill in the blank. Um, and in internalized homophobia, the fill in the blank is gender or sexuality, but I think most of us have a much easier time having loving acceptance towards children than we do towards ourselves. And so children's fiction is a great way, like go read stories about kids who where the thing that you hate about yourself is true about them and practice loving them and then let that move backwards. Um,
Yeah.
yeah.
Beautiful. Oh my gosh. Where can people learn more about your work or like what you're doing or say
Um, yeah,
anything?
here's the problem. I am like not on almost any social media. Um,
Good.
yeah,
Stay. I hate it.
I was like,
Mm-hmm.
I actually think that I just want to be a hermit. Um, but no,
Love
they
it.
can email me. Let me think about which email to give out. Um,
You can send it to me later and I can put it
yeah,
in
I'll send you good
the
contact
show notes.
information and they can drop it in the show
Mm-hmm.
notes.
Mm-hmm.
And
That'd be great.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. Y'all, do you, well, I guess depending on where you're at and his jurisdiction, if you're looking for a
Oh, if you're
counselor,
in
looking for a couples
Connecticut,
counselor, mm-hmm,
you can, I think you can Google me. Um,
do it.
and I can be your therapist. I can't be your
Please.
friend and your therapist, but I can be your
Mm-hmm.
therapist.
Yeah. I know it's a hard choice, but you should let him be your therapist. It should be, that's a choice you should make.
Yeah.
Well, I really appreciate you doing this
Yeah.
and coming on. It won't be the last time.
I hope not.
And yeah, it's so funny. I keep saying, oh, these episodes are going to be 30 minutes. They're going to be short. How in the world people do 30 minutes? I feel like
Well,
we barely scratched the surface
hey,
and
we stayed under an hour.
we stayed under an hour. Um, but everyone, if you really love this, we're actually going to do another Patreon episode I've decided for our Patreon, there's different tiers. I'm doing a series for our first tier on just kind of the Bible and sexuality things, not like how we've been taught through it, but just kind of in a new holistic way. Talked last month about Tamar and
Ooh.
Judah in Genesis. It was fun.
Ooh.
I
I
know.
love.
I have a goal to go through every book, find a story and like of every book of the Bible or like a piece of every book of the Bible and engage with it in a little bit of like what we can learn. So I have no idea how this is going to work out. So that's like first tier, but for second tier, I'm going to do some extra interviews. So we're going to talk about celibate partnerships. Timon did research in his master's and
Ah,
can't wait to talk about that. That's going to be
can't wait to
great.
tell you about it. It was so much fun.
Yeah, so come over there, have fun with us. You can support us on Patreon. The link is in the show notes. You can also follow my monthly newsletter. This last month for August, Grant Hartley, good old Grant, talked about Lectio Divina and how that engages for queer people in the newsletter. There's a lot of stuff coming out there. As always, listen, subscribe, rate, review wherever you listen. And if you're interested in spiritual direction or cohorts, or if you're a pastor or church looking for consulting, go to holyourselves.org. And again, if you're in Connecticut and looking for a therapist, reach out to this man. So,
Work with Josh. Give him your money.
yeah, both of us. You can have therapy. I have a lot of people that they have a therapist and a spiritual director. It's very helpful, actually.
Wow.
So, you
They'd be
know,
like our children.
um,
They'd do so great.
our children. I love it. Thanks as well to the Transient friends for our theme song, as always, dear friends. Um, and thank you all for joining us on Holy Ourselves. May you go in this week just knowing you are seen and loved and invited to live from a place of wholeness. Until the next time, keep becoming.